Okay, we should be live. I'm going to check a couple of things. I'm seeing it starting on YouTube. Yeah, I have a cover. I will just check on YouTube if everything's fine and then make the introduction. But it looks pretty much. Yes, we are live. Okay. Hi everybody.
Okay.
Welcome first of all on the replay. I have tonight DarkSky with me on the channel to discuss about the update process. Hello DarkSky. Thanks for
Hey,
joining us.
hello. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, looking forward to this discussion. As you know, guys, we are in the update 303, beginning of the year, then 304, which was an adjustment, and now we're going to have 305, which should be the final stage of the yearly update process as you know it. And I met DarkSky in Munich at a tournament. I also had before the suggestion of some team members of the Ninth Age who told me, yeah, could be interesting to discuss with DarkSky. And I also saw from time to time is updated data with the average of the armies. You probably also know that. I think it's interesting for most of the players. So I thought that should be a very interesting discussion tonight with DarkSky. Maybe to get things started, DarkSky, can you just sum up quickly your role within the Ninth Age project? For how long have you doing this? What have you done before? A little bit, yeah, what's your involvement around the project and the game? Quickly.
Yeah, sure. I started the project in any official capacity actually in two things. The first thing was I was using BattleScribe a long time ago, it feels already, and I was kind of annoyed. There were a lot of bugs in the lists. Things didn't work so well. So I just did it myself. I applied to be able to change the BattleScribe files, set it up, and because there was no other maintainer, I was basically part of the tool support group. And the other thing that I did was I was asked to become ACS for the Dread Elves community. I had been an active member, quite often criticizing the project for quite some time. But the people thought that apparently some of my posts made sense and said that why don't you become like an ambassador for the army and be a connector to the community. And that was, I think, shortly before the lab process for the Dread Elf started. So basically I just got on when it became a really hot topic, when a lot of people were posting there. A lot of updates come out, the alpha version 1, 2, 3 and stuff like that. At some point in time during that process, I became more and more involved with the game design of the army. I was involved as an ACS to give my feedback on stuff. And basically, one thing that happens in the project, I think, is that if you really care about it and you're getting involved and you're getting in a helpful manner involved into topics, people will give you more responsibility if you take it. So at some point in time, Christos, so Laconas is his online handle, asked me to become the co-head of the ACS team overall when Just Flow retired. And I also was asked to join the PRT, the pricing team, or some also call it the balance team, at some point in time, and then later on also game design team. Right now, I'm the senior designer, one of 8 senior designers. All senior designers are responsible for 2 armies. I'm responsible for the Highborn Elves and the Dread Elves. And we all basically discuss with our lead game designer what kind of stuff is to be done, what kind of topics need to be solved, where the direction of the game should go. And in the pricing team, I'm the co-head after Palmo, who is the head of the pricing team. Okay. In the pricing team, basically we have a mixture of people. So we have like real experts who are top international players, like Dicebreaker or I hope I pronounce it right, Gundi Salvo or Gundi Salvo.
Yeah.
I don't know how to pronounce it in Spanish. I'm sorry. But we also have people who are more on the data side like me, who just try to understand what's happening and give a solid data foundation. I would say it's a good mixture. It's also necessary. The top tournament players often see trends before they become relevant in the data. But sometimes, even if you're a top player, you can be a little bit biased. Maybe you have a local meta, right, that you're talking on. And so it's good to be able to say like, yeah, I don't see it in the data. Maybe it's, a local thing, or maybe it's a trend that will become global at some point in time. We have been right at some point in times. We have been wrong at some point in times. But overall, I think it works out quite good.
Okay, thanks a lot for this introduction. Really nice. So to sum it up, guys, you see you have the game design team with the lead game designer, which is Ali, and then so to say, with him, you have 8 game designers who are responsible for 2 books. I think we understood that. And apart from that, you have the pricing team responsible for the balance or the pricing of the entries within the book, which are a mix between data guys like DarkSky and more like top player, very competitive players that know very well the meta on an international base, which I think also is a good mix and important. So I'm eager now to hear more about the data process. I will move on to the next slide. You should see on the live the questions. So that's going to be I think the line I'm going to try to follow. The idea with DarkSky is going to go through the process. So first start with 303, aka the first update, the first yearly update of this year, to get it a little bit more understanding or context how it was done, because I've been hearing some things as part of the staff, but I'm only really partially involved. So I'm really eager to understand more about what has been done. Then we are going to go through 304 and then 305. And through that process, the idea is to understand better how is the project, an Anthage project, using data, and how is this combined with more, you mentioned before, top players' views. Is it a mix between the data and the top player views? You're going to answer that point. I think that's going to be very interesting for us to understand. Maybe let's start before all of that, and then I will go through at the end, after those 3 update points. We're going to go through a little bit more about the future and what's to expect. Is it the best process and so on? So go a bit broader about the future. But maybe to start a little bit in the past, 303, aka the first update. To my understanding, what I've been told or understanding, maybe I'm wrong, it was rather data driven with an algorithm dictating the price changes. If they go up and down, maybe you have example for us to understand a little bit better that there is pick rate, there is army performance. Or do you get all of that and make some sense out of that? And was 303 exclusively data driven, or was there as well some manual changes? I think that would be interesting as well to understand this whole process of 303.
Okay. So in general, right, the 303 update, the end of the year update in 2025 is like our big update in the year right now. It's the one where we touch all of the books, and it's scheduled way ahead. A reason why it is at the end of the year is that especially the layout team says this is the time where they can make stuff happen. Because we can do all kinds of things. If layout isn't available, and it has been a bottleneck in the past, nothing gets published in the end. Without layout, we don't have a product. So that's the reason why it is at this point in the year, right? So the data process. I think the easiest part of your question to answer is it manual or completely algorithm and data driven? I would say it's manual with data support. This is, I think, the best description. We would like to be much more algorithmic and much more data driven, but it's a I would say it's a manpower and work hour stuff that would need to make this happen. It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
I think, especially in a volunteer organization, it's hard to achieve. And there is one thing missing to make this really happen, and that would be a combining. I'm gonna use a big word here, right? A combining theory of game balance. You know, something that would, for every entry, for every option in the book, be able to say, this is balanced, too good, too bad, played not enough, played too much, right? And we don't have that. We are trying to get there. I would say there are like every year, every month, there are like little islands popping up with a little bit of ground that we covered, but we're still a few islands in the big sea right now, I would say, concerning that.
Okay.
So what we do is we collect all the data. You can see it on the 9Sage data tool. And those data basically tell us how often is something played. That number is bare, and it does not have any meaning until we give it meaning. So one of my favorite examples is always that play rates are not comparable unless you understand the army. So if you look at beast herds, for example, right, there are 3 options, I think, for the BSB: the beast chieftain, the centaur chieftain, and the minotaur chieftain. But do you really want each of those options to be played exactly the same amount? Most people, I think, would agree with me that that's not the case, because the beast chieftain is much more generic. It fits into more units. Whether the minotaur BSB is and the centaur BSB, they go in one unit, right? So they are much more specialized. So what you want is, and that's the detail, right? So what is the correct aspect ratio between these entries? Is it 3-to-1? Is it 4-to-1? You know, these kind of things, we are just discussing them, and we are getting there. But these needs to be solved in order to have like an algorithmic approach. So what we do right now is we assign PRT members for different armies, and they need to do a suggestion of balance changes, and it needs to be aligned on the data. But it's up to the PRT member to say a ratio of 3-to-1 between beast chieftain and centaur chieftain is good or not good. They have to basically argue for their changes if they seemingly go against the data. But we also have some fixed rules, for example, for extraordinary entries, so entries that you can only play once in your list. Their numbers are naturally lower because you can't spam them, right? You can't ever get 300% on an entry that's only played once. So we have to find a corridor of like 20 to 40%, which is a good play rate. If it's lower, we might consider buffing it. If it's higher, we might consider nerfing it. What we don't ever allow would be that if an extraordinary entry is played over 40%, we won't ever allow it to be buffed.
Yeah.
Because we say, you know, the play rate over 40% for an extraordinary entry, that's already quite good. You can't just buff a good entry more. So in this yearly balance patch, we try to achieve 2 things at once, which makes it hard. We try to fix the external balance between armies. So that's the external performance of the army, right? Right now, warriors are quite good. Vermin Swarm is quite bad. So when we do that, we always try to balance to the middle. So you could also balance to the top or balance to the bottom. You know, balance to the top would be everything else gets buffed until everything is as strong as the warriors. Balance to the bottom, the same thing, vice versa. But balancing to the middle has the big advantage that you don't need to touch as many things, right? You don't need to make such big and drastic changes to the point values, because going from the worst to the middle is only half as much as going from the
makes
worst
sense.
to the best. Then the other thing that is much more easy to achieve when you're balancing to the middle is fixing internal balance. Internal balance is something that we have coined a term for between the performance of the entries in the army. And there we differentiate between intra-unit balance, which is the options inside a unit entry. For example, the infernal warriors, they can take like great weapons, they can use, I think, pistols and their special flintlocks. And we want every option to be viable. Not always best or optimal, but at least viable, right? You shouldn't feel, you shouldn't think about an entry and say, that's just always going to be worse. I mean, there are always some, but we try to avoid that.
Okay.
So that's intra-unit balance. And it also touches on whether units are played small, medium, or large sizes. So we want units to be viable, ideally in all sizes, which is, I think, the hardest thing to do. But at least we are working towards that. And then there's also what we call inter-unit balance, which means the balance between two different units in an army. And ideally, if the army has a certain amount of special entries and we see the play rates, we want those play rates to be reasonably within each other. And that is something, why I said manual with data support. We don't have a unifying theory that can explain to you whether a play rate of, 35% for any specific special entry in any army is good or bad. You have to compare it to the other entries. You have to understand what the replication limit of that unit is. And you have to understand a little bit about what the role of the unit is. For example, I would say if Empire of Sonnstahl would be playing only 30% of Imperial Guard, I would say that's most definitely a problem, because that's their only really infantry scoring outside of core. Where if you have 30% on a Dwarvenhold special infantry entry, and Dwarvenholds have like a lot of infantry because they don't have access to cavalry, right? Then 30% might be fine, right? Maybe it's more of a niche unit that doesn't see like broad appliance. So that's where like the human factor comes in.
All right. Very interesting. Maybe in relation to that, we also have a question. I think could be a little bit in relation to that. It's a question from Joss from the chat. Thank you for the question. He asked, on top of data analysis, do you currently have a list of players that are, so to say, under the radar, and you follow what they play, the result they get? Do you have a particular following of some maybe top player to see what they have identified, potentially also kind of loophole in the books or things that could be very good? Do you follow particularly some players, or not necessarily? It's more like generally speaking data, and individual don't matter that much?
I think because we have Gundi and Dicebreaker in our pricing team, those are already high profile players that we naturally not really follow, right? They're already in the team. They already tell us the things that they think is necessary. In regards to the loophole thing, I think if it's a rule loophole, then it's usually rules clarity team who are doing like an excellent job. I think the clarity of our rules is very good. They are quite proactive on some of the things. Sometimes internally when I read this, I need to like think like for 5 minutes to what they are really talking about, why this is a problem. But they're always very clear on those things. If it's a loophole, more in the sense of not a technical loophole, but like the deep watch spam lists maybe, then there is usually the discussion, right?
Yep.
So people are like up in arms about like this is totally you can't play against this. Even bad players win tournaments because it's mindlessly pushing 18 units across the field, something like that. You have to, first thing you have to do, I think, is take a deep breath, remove the hyperbole from the messages, right? And then talk to people who have actually played against it, right? Have actually experiences. Talk to the players who played the list. It's always easy to gang up on somebody and say your unit is overpowered. You need to nerf it. And then there's different discussions, right? What to do. Sometimes, usually these things are landing on Early's doorstep, who has to make the ultimate decision of whether this is going to be just prices, whether it's going to be a replication limit, whether it's going to be a rules nerf, maybe. But the pricing team itself, without any additional orders from high above, so to say, has only the capacity to change the prices and only the prices, not the replication limits, not the percentages of core special characters, nothing like that. It's by design that pricing team can only change prices. And that is also casting values of spells. This is
part of the pricing.
What pricing team can do. Yeah.
Maybe quickly about 304, so the last little update. Did you maybe first? It would interest me to understand. Did you had in mind this like 3-step process for the update, or was it more like, okay, we need a first hotfix, so this is going to be 304, very limited on some particular issue, and then we are going to do a cleaner 305? Was it the idea? Was it planned before? Was it a reaction to, I would say, War of the Dark God and Dread Elf because they were the main target? Was it a reaction to that being too powerful and you thought, okay, let's take maybe the opportunity to change something now to have then still a little bit of time before the end date for 305, basically?
So 304 was always planned.
Okay.
We always plan so sometimes it's called hotfix, but process-wise, it's not a hotfix because a hotfix is unplanned. Right?
Yeah.
So we always schedule an update early in the year to catch the mistakes that we made in December quite easily. If you look at it from a pricing team perspective, we have something around, I think, between 1,600 or 2,000 priced entities. So even if you do 99% right, you get 20 things that are really brokenly wrong. And we want to catch those things naturally. If we are really good, or just lucky, then we don't have to do anything dramatically in the 304 time frame. But we always knew that this wouldn't be the case for 3rd edition, because in the past years, the times when we had to do like nothing or close to nothing in that patch update at the beginning of the year, that was like to the end of 2nd edition when we already had like really good balance and a really so to say settled product that had a lot of maturity. With the introduction of the Legends of the Ninth Age season pack in 2022, we had a lot more to cover. We also had the legendary characters to cover. We needed to adjust for new maps, for new scenarios, which also changed the performance of some armies. And we also had a redesign window at the end of 2025.
Yeah.
And redesign, from a pricing team perspective, I'm kind of like wearing two hats here because I'm also in the game design team. As a game designer, for the Dread Elves and then now also for the Highborn Elves, I want to fiddle with the designs that I think can be improved. There are always some units that you think are not quite right, they don't feel the vibe of the army, or you see that it could be so much better if I change something. And as a pricing team member, I always dread those because they put in chaos into the mix. And for new entries that are design changed, there is a different process because we don't have data to rely on, right? So because the entry is new, you don't have a hallmark of pricing. So for these stuff, we do what we call the blind pricing process. So for these, I set up some online documents, some Google spreadsheets, and every pricing member has a spreadsheet that only they can access, nobody else, but the team leads, so Palmo and me, can look at them. And then everybody puts in their number, and then Palmo and me see the result overall. Usually what we do is if everybody is roughly in the same ballpark, we just pick the average. And if there is wide difference, then we start up a discussion like, why is it so wide, right? Ideally, because we have top players on the team, they should arrive at a price point that is hopefully the same or equal, right? But if it's very wide, then we open the discussion, and maybe sometimes someone has a compelling argument and puts more people on their side. But having said that, the blind pricing process is much worse than the data-driven one. I think you can see that on the Harpies and the Dancers, who were underestimated quite a bit, and they both had huge redesigns. So in the 3.04 update, we had to make a few changes to things that we thought would be very problematic if we leave them be, not only for external balance, but especially for the internal balance, right? We don't want an army that feels like it has a few must-take entries and a lot of other stuff that you just take because you have reached the replication limit of the must-takes. So I would say, long story short to your question, 3.04 was always planned, but the scope, we hoped the scope would be smaller, but we adjusted the scope to address things that we think would be needed to be addressed.
Okay, very interesting. Okay, I would like to transition before 3.05 into something a bit broader, which has been very intriguing to me. How do you, let me find the right word, how do you put value, how do you rate or take into consideration the quality of data? What I mean by that, I have the feeling, since for 3.03 you had very large amount of data at your disposal. You have from ETC games, you have plenty of games. You know that better than me, but the amount of data is really big in comparison to what you're going to have for 3.04 or 3.05. And I would wonder, how do you take that into account for an update like 3.05, which will be done if we speak about data? If, to my understanding, the process is still the same, meaning manual but based on data, how are you going to take into account those data with such a small sample in comparison to the bigger sample that you had for 3.03? And are you not afraid of potential more extreme event basically inside such a small sample of data? You could have like a high performing person for a particular book which represent a higher amount of games in comparison to what he would have had for 3.03 in comparison to a broader scale of data.
So I think in the grand scheme of things, the main point of my answer would be scope. So for the end of year update, when we have the most data, we define a large scope.
Yeah.
So we give some directions to the teams. So we said, so we learned that from the past, it's better to change a little bit less units, but more than changing everything a little bit, because that has the danger of doing only homeopathic changes. That like 5 points here or 5 points there won't matter too much. If you have a greater demon like the Miser overperforming to an extent that it's in 80% of the lists, 10 points or 20 points ultimately won't matter. Also, the end of the year update is not only, I forgot that earlier, it's not only made to increase the balance, that's our main goal, but we also want to shake up the meta, right? We want units that have not been played to come forward, and therefore it's allowed to push them much more. You can, if you make a good argument about a unit, why it should become 50 or 100 points cheaper or more expensive, chances are it might get done. I think the Infernal Bastion got like such a big change at some point in time. The other updates don't allow that. They only allow 1 or 2 steps in our pricing grid to go up or down to impact, to prevent such a drastic mistake from being made.
What do you mean by the other update? You mean like 304, 305?
Exactly.
Okay, it's going to be smaller scope and not so extreme because you have less data at your disposal and to avoid the risk of making misinterpretation of the trends, if I understand correctly. Okay.
Yeah, that's true. And it's also 304 and 305 are less structured because we are somehow reacting to the reality. And there is intense internal debate about how much should be done. Right? There are people who are more on the conservative side who say like, without proper data, I don't want to do anything, even if it looks bad right now. And there are players who are more willing to say, we don't have the data, but I'm pretty sure, we asked some top players, we have these preliminary tournament results, and it's an emerging quality of the system. Ultimately, the Ali decides what the scope will be. He gives out the order to, or the marching orders to the pricing team, and then Palmo and me, we try to translate that, what we should be doing, into quantizable chunks of stuff that needs to be done. For example, for the 305 update, we have just said, because the 305 update was, I think, not planned. This is something that we felt we needed to do. Not something that we initially wanted to do. And we have broken it down quite easily. We have said like the strongest army, like warriors, they get 5 nerfs. Then the other overperforming armies, I think Dwarven Olds and Empire, they get 4. The middle of the pack get 3. And Sylvan Elves and Vermin Swarm, we have said that they are like, they are like lying in the hospital, in the intensive care unit. They get some special treatment where people will put in more work.
Can you elaborate a little? You said like 5 nerfs. It means like 5 particular unit or option where you're going to focus to put a little nerf to tone down something.
Yeah, it's so I used a term that we use internally before, priced entity, right? Priced entity is every single thing that has a point value. And that can also be free, right, for 0 points. And that's not what I meant with a nerf here. It's more globally like 1 unit. And then that unit might get 1 nerf to their base cost or to the extra models. It also may get both. It also may get 2 nerfs and 1 buff if the people who are working on it think that there's a really underpowered option, and they just nerf the others a little bit more and then buff the underpowered option a little bit. But it's because 305 was not really that planned before. We didn't have time to prepare a good process document on how to do things.
Yeah.
So everything is a little bit more, this is the gist of it. Try to change things in the spirit of how it's meant. But for warriors, the problem that we had is we tried to nerf them in 303 according to the metrics that we had. And we recognized that our process for 303 with the tools that we are using has its limits when armies are very bad internally balanced. So it works very well for armies that are internally somewhat balanced, but very bad for things that are extreme. And Warriors was very extreme and was overperforming. So we thought we nerfed them quite a lot. And then in 304, we already recognized we didn't get there. Then in 304, we did some really strong nerfs, I think. And then now we are at 305 and they are still very strong. So we have to acknowledge at this point that what we did in the past, for Warriors at least, wasn't good enough. There's something that we don't understand about Warriors completely that makes them somehow resistant of our structured approach.
Maybe if I may ask a question on Warriors, because I know that at least in my community I hear a lot about Warriors, and I'm also hearing that in other communities. I would be intrigued because I think the feeling that I heard the most was for the players, they got nerfed on things that were played a lot. But what I heard that a lot of players understood or had the feeling was the fact that actually entries that weren't played at all during the whole year were not bad. They were just not as good as overperforming entries, and therefore I think it was the bit frustration for some other players that saw huge discount on stuff like Feldrak, stuff that weren't that bad actually, but they weren't as good as like Forsworn, really over the top. And therefore, I think that was a bit the conception that some player had. They were like having the feeling, and myself including, we had the feeling, okay, this is just kind of an algorithm thing, because you have data that say, okay, nobody plays Feldrak, so they have to be reduced by 40 points. But actually, they don't really need it because they are still strong without those minus 40 points. Was it something done still manually but data-driven leads these minus 40 points? Let's take this example. Or was it something like you tried to do because you thought, okay, it's not picked at all, so we still need to help them, even if it's Warrior of the Dark God, we still need to give them some buffs to make those entries playable? Is it something, it was more like a guideline from the data, or something like you did because you thought it was right and it was an error, and then you try to correct, to adjust in the case of Wretched One, Forsaken One and stuff?
Yeah, so you're touching on a lot of ground here.
Yeah, sorry.
So yeah, no, it's good. I like talking about it. I just, interrupt me if I talk too long. So the first aspect is something that we call masking. And I think that happened. It's pretty apparent that it happened, right? So the Forsworn were so strong that they masked a lot of other units, right? They were so OP that a lot of other entries could hide behind them. And it's true. We somehow, so because that's the only thing we can do, we make an assumption. We know that the assumption is not true all the time, but most of the time that's why we use it, is that play rate is equivalent to power level, right? It's obviously not the same. We saw that, but it's the best we can do for now. We have some data guys, WAMP87 and Kanuma, working on much more advanced statistical models to get more insight, like correlating picking an entry to the external average score, right? So there might be an entry picked a lot, but if you pick it, your expectation of the result gets lower. So we will use that more and more, I think, in the future. But yeah, masking is a big problem because ultimately you don't know, right? I think Forsworn is a very good example. Another one where we wanted to be very careful was Demons with the Miser, because all we really knew was that the Miser is exceedingly strong, maybe the strongest model in the game at that point, I think, or one of the strongest, right? But you don't really know because you can't play more than 2 greater demons in a list. If one slot is always taken, and there are 7, so there's a lot to choose from, there are others with pick rates of 2%, 4%, 5%, but you don't know, are these really okay? And it's just a Miser who is too strong, or are they really bad?
Yeah.
And I guess for us, that's something that we just, we just take it. We just say it's too weak in all cases. And sometimes with warriors, we look a little bit foolish. But I think, for most of the armies, it works out quite okay.
Yeah,
I would say.
definitely. I agree. Yeah. Yeah, I definitely singled out warriors. What I've been saying multiple times on my channel is definitely I feel the balance is better after the update than before. So I think the goal is achieved. But we saw some reaction of that, and I was eager to understand. So yeah, I think we get to understand a bit better the process, what to expect for 305. So you told us a couple of armies a bit over the top. They are to expect a bit more nerfs. Middle of the pack still a bit of nerfs. Apart from that, they are still getting buffs as well for. Okay.
I cannot disclose too much, right?
Yeah, I know.
But as I said before, right, we always try to balance to the middle.
Yeah.
So this means that I think if you look at the play rates of specific armies, you will probably be able to guess, a mid-tier army will get like 3 nerfs. And then if you take a look at the armies who are between 9.6 and 10.4, you can guess what will be nerfed for most of them, and you can also guess what will be buffed for most of them. Sometimes we buff a few items, sometimes we buff a unit instead, and we try to buff the worst option first, right?
Yeah.
So if an army is always played at max size, then we buff the base cost and we nerf the extra models cost, for example. It's one of the easier things to do. And yeah, it's ultimately what you said before is the thing that I always hope that players will tell us, that they say that the overall balance in the game has been improving with the patch that we are doing. But we always try to improve, right? I'm like not happy about a few things in the 303 update, which is why internally we included the whole GDT and also the whole ACS team.
Yeah.
And we do what I know from my day job, right? What we call a retrospective. So I collected everything that went good, what people want to be keeping on doing, and everything that went bad. And then we do some specific actions on improving how our tools are dealing with these lists that have like really bad internal balance, how people can work faster with the tools that we have, things like that. Okay. So hopefully every update will be a little bit better. But from history, I can already say the easiest and best update that we did was the last 2nd edition update.
Okay.
We had worse tools than we have right now. We had less data than we had right now, but because 2nd edition was also so well balanced at this point, we had like a really good foundation to build on. And I hope that 3rd edition will get there over time, but realistically, it will take a few years.
Yeah, I understand that, and I was thinking about that the other day. It's very hard for you to balance the books when something like just the season pack has such an influence. I mean, you change 2 primary objectives to make it a bit less dynamic, then other type of list will be stronger. At the moment, I feel it's very much about the dynamism, going through the board control. That's why combat armies are a bit over the top at the moment, or at the better one. MSU are a bit better. We get those trends, right? But for me, it's very much correlated also to the design of Season Pack 2 in comparison, for example, to Season Pack 1, which allows static armies like the one I was playing last year, this type of Immortal gun line from Infernal Dwarfs, which was very static, was allowed to exist. But I think that exact list would be much, much worse under Season Pack 2 rules. So I think you can take an army that was maybe overperforming, wouldn't be as good under different rule sets of primary objective. And I think that's also something hard to consider for you, because it could change again next year and also have an impact on entries of army books. So it could shaken this hard to find balance for you.
Yeah, that's true. So that's a reason why in the latest update of the data tool, you can also see statistics on maps and primary and secondary objectives. Ultimately, we want every secondary objective to be roughly as good as the others. I think I remember you saying
I complain a lot.
that you think that you said like conserve your numbers.
I was surprised by the data.
Is the best to take for you, right? And it's also, I mean, because you can have somewhat control over the secondary, right? It also shows how often it's chosen, what people think is good. So this kind of stuff, I would say we are still at the very beginning of the journey, right? We just started to collect the data. On maps, I also calculated how big the gap between first turn and not first turn is, because I wanted to find out whether specific placements of terrain on the maps affect how much better it is to go first. The season pack definitely has an impact. Our main problem regarding these things that change stuff is always the amount of data, right? We are not like a major video game producer who can pull millions of matches every day and do a software patch, because we are ultimately a hardware game. Even though you can play on Warhol, we also have to be cognizant of the fact that people sometimes just want to play their list that they have set up and painted for, and can't handle like too many frequent updates all the time. Otherwise they get frustrated.
Indeed.
And we have to balance that with I think you gave me one question before about people feeling that the game for them becomes stale at some point in time, which is like the opposite ends of the spectrum. And it's something that we want to balance, that we need to balance, I think. And that's something where I, as a team member, always want to interact with the community and ask them to be understanding about, the constraints that we are in. Because it's easy if you are like really invested in the game, right? You are a frequent tournament player. You play like lots of game, like the people we want to have in the project, the people we want to have fun with the game. And then of course you say like, I already played 50 games with this season pack or 100 games with this season pack. I want to have a new one, right? I want to have more maps and more scenarios. 6 is not enough for me. I'm ready to play much more scenarios. And then you have to balance it with people who play once a month, who are overwhelmed if they play once, then they don't interact with the hobby because they have real life going on. They come back 1 month later, want to play a pickup game with a friend, and then their friend tells them, your list, you can't play that anymore. They changed this and this and this and this. Now you need to remove 200 points from your list. Otherwise it's illegal. Or people, what happened for me actually, we started a game, an update came out and it changed some base rules. and we were playing with different base rules in our heads, right? Because I already knew the update and the other person didn't get it yet, right?
Yeah.
So there was like, yeah, but this is like this. And I said, no, it's like this. They changed it like 4 weeks ago. And the other person just said, damn, I didn't know this.
Yeah. It's
and
annoying. Yeah.
yeah, it's, I don't claim to have the solution. I think nobody in the project can claim that. I just say that, if there's something like that and you think like, why is the project not doing it? Right? Why don't they do like more frequent changes? There's usually a reason that we have to accommodate for. I mean, the other reason is also workload on the team. It's not easy keeping people on if you demand them to be constantly doing stuff.
Mm-hmm. Okay, interesting. One thing that I was very surprised about, I heard that from Ali before 303, I think. He told us that one of the goal was to reduce further model bloating on the table, was somehow formulated that way, which means basically avoid that we get more and more and more models on the table for the same points, which was the reduction that we already had from 4,500 to 4,000. And I was a little bit surprised, to be honest with you, which what happened with 303, which is relatively a lot of buffs. Means I saw several lists who were able to play with more models than before the update. And I was a bit surprised by that, because for me, somehow it seems not too much what I heard from Ali. Do you know more about that? Is it something where maybe it was the initial idea and then you move the target to something a bit different for some valid reason? Or do you see that differently?
So I think 3 points that I want to talk about here. The first is the definition of model bloat. It's a very specific one because the third edition has a very specific goal. And the one that we are working with is that we want to have, after the reduction to 4,000 points, we want to have the same amount of units on the table, but we want especially the units that have a high model count, like the goblins or other units that take like really a lot of models. We want them to be able to do what they were achieving in second edition with maybe 50 models, and ideally achieve the same thing in third edition with, I'm going to say 35 models. Don't put me down on the number, but that's the general idea.
Okay.
And ultimately, I think, but I wasn't part of the third edition design team. I think ultimately the reason for the press of ranks rule. One of the reasons, right? So a reason for this is realistically, you won't get a newcomer into the hobby by telling them, before you can play, you need to paint 240 goblins. Yeah. I mean, you can always get people excited about painting the big spider, right?
Yeah.
It's an exciting model. It's your centerpiece. And then maybe something like a green great idol, and then a cavalry unit of 5 or even 10. That's fine as well.
200 infantry is less exciting. Yeah, obviously.
Yeah. It's really dragging on, right? And while you are painting it, the balance changes, and then you say like, oh, I used to have this amount of, I don't know, spare dudes, and now the spare dudes are not as good as anymore. Now I need 60 more hand weapon dudes. I think the community is fairly open to proxying and fairly open to using the models that you have.
Yeah.
But ultimately, people also want to have like the best fitting model on the table, right? It's not just what you need to do, it's what you want to do.
Yeah, obviously.
And I think like, cutting these 15 models from 4 units, that's like 60 models, depending on your paint speed, that's several months of work, right? If you have a very busy life, a family, maybe a job that has like where you need to sometimes work on the weekend or something like this, your painting down gets cut down by a lot.
Yeah.
That could be a year's work for you. So yeah, that's like the model bloat stuff.
Okay.
Then the other stuff on the 303 update is that we use a tool called the average list. It's really just what it says. It's all the tournament data that we have, and then for any army, exactly the average list, like 0.87 Chaos Lords, 51% Barbarian Chiefs and stuff like that. And then we use goals for that list. So for Warriors, for example, the goal was the average list. So what everybody played throughout the year was to be 200 points more expensive.
Yeah.
The point was, and that's, you will realize that why I said before that we are badly equipped to deal with really bad internal balance, is that if your wretched ones are only played 2% of the lists, changing their poll values has very little effect on the average list, right? So maybe a point example so that people can understand it more easily. So if a unit that costs 200 points is played in 10% of the lists, it goes in as 20 points to the list.
Okay.
If you make that unit to 180, then it's 18 points in the list. So your average list only gets 2 points more, only 2 points cheaper.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you play, I think Force One had like 140%.
Yeah.
If you make them 10 points more expensive, it's plus 14 points.
Yeah.
So that's why there are so many buffs, because we are buffing the units with the low play rate and we are nerfing the ones with the high play rate.
Yeah.
So you can't ever go even on the average list, because that would be a huge buffing. Everything would get cheaper over time. So our default goal for armies that were in perfect balance was plus 70 points.
Yeah.
And I think in hindsight, plus 70 points is not enough. It might need to be plus 100 for the average army. But that's how we do it, and that's like one of the reasons why these buffs to wretched ones and so on were so strong, because their play rate was abysmal and they were just masked behind the Force One. So currently we are trying to adapt that average list tool to have some stricter lower and upper boundaries, so that, for example, an entry with a 140% play rate, if you nerf them and change their value, it doesn't go in with a factor of 1.4, but only with a factor of 1.0, for example. Yeah. And then the nerfs become a little bit harsher, because you don't get as many points towards your goal of plus 200. And the buffs also don't become as easy to get, because even if your play rate is only 2%, we will maybe count it as 20% or something like that. So that's like our main huge learning from me as the author of the tool and from the team. And I hope that the update at the end of 2026 will be able to rely on a much better process and a much better tool. And you will, I think, see a lot less buffs this way.
Okay, interesting. Some glimpse in the future. Interesting to hear. Do you have, I would be now addressing maybe some particular example, just to know also, if you try to observe some trends. We see that MSU seems to be quite strong play style under the current rule set. Is it something you try to follow as a trend, like thinking, okay, heavily taking advantage from that MSU playstyle with regularly, 8+ scoring unit, a lot of unit on the table, so we need to try to act on, base cost or something different? Do you have a strategy overall on the game to address issues like that? Is it some trends that you follow, and how you tackle them? That would interest me.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, we do have two strategies on this. I think the one is more driven by the game design team, around Ali, for example. So I mean, it's the scoring thing, as far as I understand it, is mainly a thing that's also being forced upon players by the structure of the primary objectives.
Yeah, indeed.
So one thing that could be done is to make a primary objective, broadly speaking, right? I'm not proposing any game design change here, but broadly speaking, what we would be discussing in this case would be, okay, we have MSU scoring everywhere. You know, we want to have a mix of units. So maybe introduce a primary objective that favors fewer larger units over more smaller units. And then there are different things that you could think about how to achieve that. But basically, it starts on an abstract level with such a goal, right? I think in the past, I don't know if it was early third edition, I think we had an objective that somehow punished if you had like very large amount of small units. I think the enemy just needed to kill 3 of them, something like that. But yeah, so that's like the game design side of things, right? Where you say like, okay, we see this emerging trend. Is that fine for us? Yes or no? And then we can push into the other direction, make that a little bit harder. And if we see something that we really don't want, we push back hard. The other thing from a pricing team is that this is something that actually we don't need to specifically tackle because the pricing team is somewhat abstract, which means that if we only see all of the units played in minimum size, we automatically raise the base cost and lower the additional models cost. According to that strategy, and several players much better than me keep telling me that points are the god stat. If you make something cheap enough, it doesn't really matter what kind of rules it has, it will get that efficient that people will play it. So if the extra models become increasingly cheaper, at some point in time, you know, you can overwhelm the opponent's 10-man units with your 15-man units. He might have 1 or 2 extras, right? But I don't know, he has 8 and you have 6, but your 6 all win versus his 6, and then you have 6 units left and he has 2 scared ones in the corner, right? And that's like an auto-correcting thing. If a unit, because we always buff the weakest state of a unit and we always nerf the best state of the unit. Right? For example, with Forsworn, we specifically said, okay, they are played with Great Weapon, they are played with the Damnation upgrade, and they are played in basically maxed out unit. So these were the exact same things that we nerfed the hardest. And then like the base cost, I don't think we cared about that too much. And the I think they kind of paired weapons or something like that. We also didn't care about that too much. And sometimes it's we undershoot, you know, it's we did move in the right direction, but not enough. Sometimes we overshoot, but I think we undershoot more often than overshoot. So if in a theoretical example, you know, might happen all of the year, everybody plays min-sized units only. Then stuff happens like we did for the Dread Elves Judicators, for example. We raised their base points by 30, which was quite a lot. But we reduced the extra model costs by 3 or 4 points, which is also quite a lot. But I think we still undershot. I think most of the Judicators are still played very small, despite we already did a 15% price increase. But I think even though we might have undershot, taking extra models on Judicators is now much more point efficient than it was
Yeah,
before, where everybody just played 10, right? And every additional model was basically, in air quotes, a mistake in list building.
I see the point. And maybe to be more concrete on 305, from what we have been hearing, there are going to be no design change on season pack. It's going to be point driven. So for that particular case, you're going to follow that kind of strategy, meaning, let's take a very infamous example. Dancers of Yema played spammed in 10-man unit. You're going to act on base cost and additional model to try to rebalance that a little bit. That's going to be the idea.
Yeah, I don't think I disclose something here when I say that dancers will become more expensive and it will be the base cost. So the question is just, so to give you, a little bit more peek on the inside. The question is not whether or not to nerf dancers. It's quite clear that the internal balance of the Dread Elves is not good at the moment.
It's how and how much?
I think it's 160% dancers and 130 or 40% harpies. The dancers are played in 10-man units. The occasional 11 or 12 there. I don't know. So naturally, we are going to nerf the base cost. So what you would be looking for here, if you don't mind me going a little bit deeper into that example.
Yes, please.
So the question is mainly, so the minimum step for dancers as a unit with 250 or 240 base cost is 10 points up. You're not allowed to go 5 points up. It's our pricing grid says you need to go at least 10 at this point cost. So the basic question is going up plus 10 base cost enough, or is going up plus 20 points base cost enough? And do you also want to improve the internal balance of that unit? So what I called before the intra-unit balance, right? In fixing the extra model costs. So that's like the first concern that anybody in the PRT will think about, right? Is it a small nudge that I need? Do I need a little bit of a bigger push? Or is it like, is the balance of the unit that bad that nobody ever plays even 14 or 15, which is not a big unit, right? I'm not talking about 20 or 25. Then they would maybe say, okay, let's do the base cost even more, but then subtract something from the extra models.
Let's be aggressive on the extra model.
Let's be a little bit more aggressive. For the end of year update, so if this were a 303 update at the end of the year, I would always tell the PRT member, go aggressive. Because at the very least, we are shaking things up a little
and you
bit.
can readjust.
For the 305 updates, it's much more conservative. So I'm not going to reveal what we chose, but it's going to be any one of these options. But then there is also the second thing that you need to consider. Right now, the Dreaders are like dead average, I think 10.1 or something like that, which is, with the amount of games that we track, indistinguishable from perfect balance. We don't know. If you have an army with a bad external balance, like dancers and harpies at the forefront, and you nerf them quite hard to get them to the middle,
it's a risk.
You are taking a lot of external power from the army, right? Because it's not overperforming. If they were overperforming, the job would be much easier. You would just say, okay, dancers and harpies get the axe, and then the army will probably fall down. And if you nerf like the weakest entry of the book, which is Thunderpack, if you buff Thunderpack by, I'm going to say a bold number, if you buff Thunderpack by 50 points, I think the army is still worse after nerfing the dancers than buffing the Thunderpack. I don't think the Thunderpack is anywhere near being good enough to take over that role. So we expect that the power level of all the armies after 305 will be a little bit lower than the power level of the armies in 304. So if you would be playing a 304 army versus a 305 army, I think the
There should be.
expectation is that the 304 army would be slightly better,
Cool.
especially if it plays the stronger entries.
Strong choice.
But yeah, I just hope that for the Dreaders, you can look at the numbers, then you will already also know what kind of units will get a buff.
I see
to a reasonable
which direction you're pointing, and that's probably something we can follow as well for other army books. Basically, the data gives you the direction where to go, and then it's just about how you want to tackle that.
So in general, because we divide the armies by PRT member, right? Everybody has, I think, 3 armies now to work on. If somebody wants to not nerf an entry with the highest play rate, all the other PRT members will ask why not. There's always a discussion to be had. I think in 303, Ollie, who is online Night One, made a really good argument about why some of the changes in the orcs and goblins don't really follow those percentages to the letter. He said that there are some exceptions that you need to make because orcs and goblins as an army is, he said it's like 3 armies rolled into one. It's basically orcs mixed and goblins, and so if you make a good argument, sometimes you can convince the others. But the basic expectation is that the strongest entries, the most played ones, will get nerfed. And then it's also true for the other way around, right? If there's an entry with 3 or 4% play rate and you don't buff it, people will ask, have you forgotten about that unit? Why is it not getting buffed? And there are like tiny, but these are really, really the exception. I only know it because it's one of the armies that I currently work on. There is like a game design ask to nerf a specific thing because it's something the army is not supposed to have at this price point. But this is like really a game design override. I told them that the data currently does not call for this change. But they said, we know, but it's just something that we don't want the army to have at this price point. So we're making that as a game design decision, which is fair, which is also a good thing that we have separated the pricing from the game design team.
Indeed, I like that. We've been talking already quite long. It's very interesting. I think I have the feeling we could continue that for hours because it's very interesting to go into the deep end of this process. But maybe before I try to close that up a little bit with a question towards the future and what's your expectation, what you hope, you wish. Can you give us any type of date or expectation for 305? Are you close to the end? Is it something? Do you have a target date that you have in mind?
I don't really know, to be honest. I think it's April, more to the end of April, I think, than the beginning. But the thing is, so the pricing and the game design team, they are working on their own timelines. Schlivek is the senior designer who is also kind of like our project manager, right? So he sets up specific timelines for us as to when we need to finish certain things. But these are way before the release. Because after we have finished, we need to transfer it to layout. So for the pricing input, I think the cutoff date is either it's this evening or it's sometime next week. But in the past, we did make a lot of progress in automating changes that we made in game design and pricing and automate them over to layout. We have been working, a truckload of stuff has been going on the layout side of things in 2025. I think it's a dramatic and huge improvement. And now what we can do, we can put in the price changes into a document, and then an automated process will pull them, will update all the documents for layout and will automatically produce a new PDF, for example. If it's just price changes, they can literally do it with one button click. And in the past, this was, I don't know how many hours of work that somebody had to do, which was very error prone because transferring numbers from one end to the other is like something that bores our brain to death, right? And when you're bored, you're making a lot of
you're
mistakes.
likely to do mistakes,
Yeah. I think it's going to be somewhere in April, but I think we also need to get better at announcing these timelines. I think Schlivek made a news post, or that there is a roadmap news post about that somewhere, but I'm notoriously bad at finding things on the forum, which is like somewhat ridiculous.
No worries. From what I've been following, it was they said April, but very vague. It's not clear exactly when. I also understand to see a little bit more the process as part of the community engagement and being in contact with Schlivek. I see that it's hard for them also to predict. They do as good as they can, but there are so many people involved. And like you said, I mean, it's all volunteer work. We all do the best we can in relation to what we give for this game with our different role in the project. And therefore, I think we should all have, as players, a lot of comprehension for that issue. Okay, thanks a lot. What I would like maybe to close the discussion with is, you hope for the future. Should we expect more or less the same for end of 2026, meaning collecting a lot of data, first update, then second, potentially third? Is it for you like the hope, the goal, or do you have something better in mind? And something also related to that, I observe for myself, but also other players that are very committed to the game, a dramatic, and I use that word on purpose, dramatic drop in motivation when they were waiting for the update. And when I take my case as an example, after ETC, you talked about shaking the meta goal of the update, because I think it should be the case. It was dried out, so to say. I mean, we knew what was the meta, we knew what were the best list, so you don't have the same motivation to try to search for, okay, it's after ETC, we knew what performed well, so let's all take the best list because I'm playing this book. And I personally encountered total lack of motivation to play the 9th Age game, while 2 months before I was fully in and thinking about that all day long, all week long. So very to one extreme to the other. And for me personally, it has a lot to do with that thing about, okay, I want a new version of the game. Like you say, it's very individual, and maybe somebody playing less would have had a completely different experience about that. Nevertheless, I heard quite a lot of players having that feeling, and I think still the large base of players within the 9th Age community are players that plays a lot and could share that feeling about the meta. So I wondered, is it something that you have identified and you would like to tackle in the future, in the sense of, I don't know, maybe you spoke about layout, but maybe still trying to advance that update from December to October, for example, to make that period after ETC shorter, try to accommodate a bit better with ETC period? Or how do you see that? Is it something, do you think is very specific to, I don't know, ETC player that play so much before ETC that they have that feeling? Or is it something you identified as being a more broad problem and you would like also to try to improve that by improving or changing the update process?
So if you have a few minutes of time,
sure.
I would go into quite a bit of detail on this. So I think the concern from the ETC players, and also I think the players around the ETC, even if you're not directly participating, I think the tournament and competitive oriented players, they look towards the ETC like a World Cup event, right? And I think it's a natural culmination of a season of playing the Ninth Age. And I would like to, if I'm free of any other constraints, I would like to do a balance update after the ETC, like as soon as possible after the ETC. I think would be great for the community.
Yeah.
It's like it feels for me natural, right? You get new rules, you prepare the longest amount of time that you have, and then at the end of the journey, there's the ETC, where you pack out, all your preparation, all your countless of tournament practice games and stuff like that. You crown the victor. One nation gets home with the trophy. Everybody cheers. People breathe in, breathe out, say what a great season it was. Hopefully, they say it was better than the one before, even better than the one before. And then, after a time, you go to your summer vacation, then you come back, and then it's okay. Everything's fresh now.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That there are new points. There's maybe a new season pack. Maybe a few design changes on your favorite army that fixes that unit that you never liked before, and now it's maybe not great but better, or maybe even great. So as I said before, in the past or right now, it's a manpower problem, and I don't say that lightly, right? But if we lose even a single member in layout, it had huge effects on the team.
Yeah.
It has a bigger effect than any other team, except maybe for some really higher position like Ali as the lead game designer. If we lose anybody from PRT, if we lose anybody from game design, from ACS, it's not as impactful as if we lose somebody in layout.
Okay.
And this is why we put a tremendous amount of work into improving the automation.
Yeah.
I had to, so that there's a Discord channel where we do all the stuff. I had to mute it because I was literally getting pings every minute. and it was like, I didn't look at it, and then there were like 400 messages of people doing stuff, like working. I felt like nonstop on these kind of things. And I'm very thankful for those people who did it. I also participated a little bit and tried to help. So what I want to do as my wish for the future, right? I'm very much a process guy. I always think, or it's always my approach, that if I improve the way I work and the way others work and the way I work towards others, ultimately I will produce the best result that I can be, because I'm working smarter, not harder.
Yeah.
So I'm very keen looking forward to improve the processes between game design, PRT, and layout, and also between the balancing process overall. I talked about the tools that we use, like the average lists. I'm currently writing a tool that creates those documents from the new recruit data and from our game design. So we codified all our game design into machine readable files, so that I don't have to set it up by hand, for example. Last year, I think in 303, I spent, I don't want to lie, like something between 60 and 100 hours just on doing the balance update alone. And a lot of that was manual work for me.
Yeah.
And I want to, ideally, I write this tool once and then I can do it, fix some bugs, and then, I don't have to do this anymore. And the more we get ahead in these kind of things, the easier it is for us to do stuff at any point when we want it to do, and not when people say, this is the only time of the year that I am able to do these kind of things. Because I think, the layout members are also players. They might also, be excited by the ETC and want to play in them. But if they play in the ETC, they don't have time to work on layout at the same time, obviously. So I would like to go to be there. Other than that, I think what you will see are improvements on the processes that we have. I hope that everybody will perceive them as improvements. Like this kind of stuff with warriors not happening anymore, at least not to that extent.
Yeah.
I hope that people will appreciate the work that we are doing.
We do.
Will...
Be sure of that. We do appreciate a lot what you're doing. And that's also for me the moment to thank you personally and all the staff member involved, because it's crazy. The work that has been done in the backstage is crazy. So thanks a lot for all what you're doing.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much. I mean, it's, that's my outlook and my wish for the future, right? Improve on things that automate stuff for us so that we can focus on the real work. And, I think the wish that you said before, right? That after the ETC, things are kind of in a lull. You would be more motivated if the update does not come in December, but sooner. I think that makes sense. And in the end, we want to do one big update per year.
Yeah.
In the end, the numbers don't care when we do it.
Yeah.
As long as it's yearly.
Yeah.
I would be all up for moving that if we can. But we have to do some homework before. I would say.
I get that. Okay.
And maybe at some point in the future we are able to say that we have solved some of the manpower issues with layout by working smarter, and that we can now do that. I think that would be a great testament to the capability of the team to improve. And also, I think it shows that we really care about, what people say, even though on the forum it gets heated a lot, right? People are passionate about the game, which is, it's a good thing to be passionate about the game, but sometimes it can be a little bit aggressive.
Intense.
But I'd rather talk to an angry person on the forum and try to explain to them why we did it in a certain way, or say, sorry, what you want to do is just not our vision of the game. And at some point in time, we have to make that decision. It's a community-driven project, but it's not a democracy, right? You can't make a poll on the forum and let that poll decide the game design. It needs to be holistic. And for that, we have Ali to keep this holistic plan in shape. And he already has to deal with 8 senior designers who can't agree on anything, to be honest. We somehow manage to always have different ideas. And he has to somehow get it all together, right? And that's not an easy job either.
Sure, indeed. Yeah, maybe to conclude, it's something... I think it's important to say the project needs people. And I think for the people who are very active at criticizing and think what is all being done not so optimal in their opinion, come with fresh idea. I think you will find a team which suits you, where you can add something. And I think the project needs people, and it's key for the survivability of the project on the long term. So I would encourage the people to engage themselves. It's also too easy to only criticize and wait for things to be done. It could be good also to try to involve yourself, have a go at it. You will see if it's doable or not with work, life, and so on balance, work-life game balance. Not so easy. I think both of us, we can talk about that. Myself with the 2 YouTube channel as well. So we have all a lot going for sure, but I think that could be not bad for more people to involve themselves and try to have a small role to start with, to see how that goes, what they learn about the project, what they can add. They can also give fresh ideas and see how that goes. I think more people should take the risk of involving themselves, and that would help massively the project on the long term.
Yeah, that's true. There's this, my small pet peeve that I have is if you're a non-English speaker, native speaker, and your English is good, and you want to, like, if you say like, I want to help the project, especially addressing not the hardcore tournament crowd, but maybe like more casual players, think about if you can help with translation. It's very scalable. You can, if you don't have the time, you do 1 hour a month, right? You get a file with some texts in English, you translate it into your mother tongue, and we have an awesome head of translation. His name online handle is Gisnuk or Gisnuk. He used to be a UN translator for law texts for African languages from English and back and so on. So there are really, really cool people to meet who are inspiring, I think. And it's also really cool if maybe, I don't know, you're from Italy and there's the Italian translation and there you found some really elegant phrase or something like that, right? And you can tell to your other Italian people, you can say, look here, I coined that term. It would have been like this really bad other thing, but I had a good idea and now it's there. It's like, it's really immediate, right? That you can say, I made that. And it really helps the beginners to have
and broad.
roots in their language, right?
Definitely.
It also feels, people feel like really appreciated if there is a quality translated product in their language.
Definitely.
Right. And I wish we were better at that. I wish we would have translations much sooner. But yeah, we're lacking the manpower, as you said, and it's something that many people can contribute. And I think it's cool if you can say like, this little part of the thing, of the whole, I made, right? I'm not just a consumer, I'm also a producer.
Who is that? Guys, you heard our message. If you want to help the project, there are a lot of roles to fill where you can contribute. So it's always something nice to do to help the project continue to grow and thrive. DarkSky, we're going to finish here. We've been talking long enough. Thanks a lot for your time, all the insight. It has been, for me, fascinating to follow this process. I'm really looking forward towards 3 or 5. Thanks a lot for the work you're doing. And we wish you all the best. Looking forward also for the future development of the project. But yeah, thanks a lot for all the hard work you're putting in. You and all the team are working for that update and the rest of the project going nearby, because there are also plenty of stuff going by on the project, and not only just updates and tournaments like most players follow. There are plenty of stuff going on. So thanks a lot for all the people working for that amazing project. Wish you all the best and take care. Thanks everybody for following that, and we wish you a very good evening and a good replay as well.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Okay. So I cut the live.